Hey guys, I have a book called Western Lane by Chetna Maroo. It's the one of the shortlisted books for the 2023 Booker Prize. And as far as I know, it's the only book by this author. I don't think she has anything else out. I did a little bit of research, I couldn't find anything. Um, but what I find really interesting about this one is that it's about sports, and something that really caught my attention when I was looking for something to read was the cover, which features you know a bunch of squash rackets, and I immediately was like, "Oh, is this about sports?" And sure enough, it is. That's definitely one of the prominent features. But yeah, I found it kind of cool that it wasn't like a romance. I guess you don't really find many books that kind of feature a sport that intimately that isn't a romance, at least in my experience. So yeah, this one's a really good one that is a good one. So I'm just gonna read the opening paragraph so that you can get a taste of what it's about. I don't know if you've ever stood in the middle of a squash court on the tee and listened to what is going on next door. What I'm thinking of is the sound from the next court of a ball hit clean and hard. It's a quick, low pistol shot of a sound with a close echo. The echo, which is the ball striking the wall of the court, is louder than the shot itself. This is what I hear when I remember the year after our mother died and our father had us practicing at Western Lane 2, 3, 4 hours a day. It must have been an evening session after school, the first time I noticed it. My legs were so tired I didn't know if I could keep going, and I was just standing on the tee with my racket head down, looking at the side wall that was smudged with washed out marks from all the balls that had skimmed its surface. I was supposed to serve, and my father would return with a drive and I would volley, and my father would drive and I would volley, aiming always for the red service line on the front wall. My father was standing far back, waiting. I knew from his silence that he wasn't going to move first, and all I could do was serve and volley or disappoint him. The smudges on the wall blurred into one into the other, and I thought that surely I would fall. That was when it started up, a steady, melancholy rhythm from the other court, the shot and its echo, over and over again, like some sort of deliverance. I could tell it was one person conducting a drill, and I knew who it was. I stood there, listening, and the sound poured into me, into my nerves and bones, and it was with a feeling of having been rescued that I raised my racket and served. So it kind of starts off with these three young girls, and they've lost their mother, and single parent, single father. He's now left to raise these young girls who are becoming, women on his own. And kind of the first thing that he wants to establish is some sort of meaning for them. He wants them to have an outlet, and he chooses squash because that's something that he himself enjoys or enjoyed when he was younger. So for him, it's instead of kind of handling the grief that they're all experiencing directly, it's more implicit. It's kind of, him passing off that responsibility to another thing that is physical. It's an expression that isn't captured in words, and it's mostly because he's afraid to say those words, and he's kind of afraid to confront those things. And his daughters kind of build this tension in themselves because there's nothing being said, there's nothing being addressed. They all kind of dealing with this loss in their own ways, and in a way, the squash court is where all those emotions and all those feelings are kind of inflated and they hyper fixate on everything. Like, you know, in the opening paragraph, the character is talking about how she's listening to the sounds of the other court. She can kind of hear everything in a hyper sort of way. And that, I feel like, is the character kind of channeling all of those emotions in a very visceral and almost more intimate way than she would if she were to, you know, have a discussion about the way she's feeling. But in its own way, it kind of is just a temporary release of that tension, and it never really goes anywhere. It's kind of just a cycle of intense physical kind of outpouring. So the fact that it kind of features a sport is something that I was really interested in, because I grew up playing sports, and not squash, but other things, not racket sports, in fact, like hockey and basketball and baseball. These were kind of the main things for me. And it kind of has me thinking about how, you know, we, you know, as a species, as a people, use sports as a kind of an escapism in some ways, but also to almost sublimate, you know, feelings in a way. It's a very physical thing. It's not necessarily one that requires a much emotional intelligence, as far as my experience goes anyways. And it's interesting how it's the father who's kind of impressing upon his daughters this need to have a physical outlet. And I feel like that's, you know, kind of a very masculine or fatherly way of handling emotion, is kind of, you know, having you do something rather than say something. And in this case, it's a sport. And so he kind of says what needs to be said without saying it through playing, you know, squash with his daughters. It's the rhythm of the ball hitting the wall, and they're volleying. That's kind of the conversation they're having is on the squash court. It's not, you know, sitting down at a dinner table as they, you know, do in the book. They're on the precipice of saying these things that they're building inside of them, and they're kind of seeing manifestations of their mother, and they're all having their own sort of emotional trajectory. Some of them are angry, some of them are kind of more reclusive and isolated, but the only conversation that takes place is on the court. And that's why it's so important for the character to perform in this tournament that kind of the book is more about. She wants to impress her father, she wants to win, but I think more than anything, it's about her kind of finding a peace with her mother being gone through this sort of conclusion of the squash experience that she's going to be finishing, probably for good, at least as far as the book says, in this final tournament. Something else I found kind of, well, I guess what kind of made the book almost a ghost story in a way is the fact that the young girls are kind of going through puberty, like they're becoming women, they're becoming young women. It kind of creates a chaos that I think, you know, kind of bears this, or, you know, creates this sort of sense of having their mother present, or kind of feeling her in certain ways. For her, the memory of her is very physical. You know, one of the daughters sits out on the balcony and kind of talks to their mother, and, you know, that's one way that they're experiencing her, and they start to, you know, they have doubts about whether that actually is a thing. Like, you know, still engage in it regardless, because that feeling that she's there is so palpable. And I feel like what creates that, or what makes that possible, is the fact that they're in a very turbulent time in their lives. Dealing with grief as a young person is in many ways different than you would experience it as an adult or as an even younger person, I feel like. So one thing is, you don't need to be a sports player or fan to read this book at all. It's about grief, it's about growing up, it's about understanding yourself in a, I guess, indirect sort of way. How we have different outlets to, let emotions out, I think, is one very big thing. So you don't need to know anything about squash, although it may help, and it can't hurt to know about squash. It's not something that, it's not a prerequisite for understanding anything. So if you're interested in anything that's kind of exploring that theme of growing up and grief and sport kind of intertwined, it's a very interesting medium. So highly recommend if that's something that's up your alley. So let me know if you guys have read this one, if you plan on reading it. I'd love recommendations that are kind of featuring sports like this. I don't come across a lot of it, but I'd love to read more of that. So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. And yeah, if you enjoyed this, feel free to subscribe and like the video. Have a good one.